Hello. Hello. Welcome to Nerd Nite, everyone. It's nice to see you. Yay, Nerd Nite. Woo! My name is Sarah. I work at the Ann Arbor District Library. And it is my pleasure to be bringing Nerd Nite to you once again here at our home base, our favorite place in the world, live. We love it. And we love our bartenders and we love them all. Okay, so we have a great show set up for you tonight. We're very excited about our three speakers. They're fantastic. But before we get into our topics, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what Nerd Nite really is. So, Nerd Nite is an event that was born out of a thing that happened way, way back in 2003. This gentleman here is Chris. Chris is drinking at his then favorite bar, the Midway, and he was a regular and he would hang out. He was a student. He was an evolutionary biology PhD candidate, and he liked to, share quality time with his friends sitting at the bar. So every year he would do a study abroad project. He would go to Cameroon and he would research his topic, which happened to be the indigo bird. And look at this cute little bird. What a charming little bird this is. But the catch here is that he's an evolutionary biologist. He wants to see what makes us tick, what makes us how we are, right? So what he finds out about the indigo bird is that it's a jerk bird. This bird sucks. This bird lays its eggs in other birds' nests, and when those jerk birds hatch, they murder the birds who belong in the nest, push them out, and trick the idiot bird parents into raising it, the jerk bird, instead of its own babies. It's the worst possible bird. And Chris loves it. This is a great story, right? So he goes back home to the Midway and he kicks back with his friends night after night after night. And he keeps telling this story, but like to, Lindsay, and then to like James, and then to like Pete. Every night, a new friend, the same story, and also the same bartender. And the bartender's like, you got to quit it. You can't keep telling this story. I'm sick of the jerk bird. I don't care how much you love this story. I'm done with it. You know what, Chris? We're going to give you one more chance. Invite all your friends. Invite them all. One last time. Tell that jerk bird story. And you have to retire it forever. And Chris is like, that actually sounds like a pretty good idea. So he did. And it was basically the first Nerd Nite. He was like, let's take this national. Let's do it forever. So he and a friend teamed up and they made it a thing. And now Nerd Nites are national. You'll find them all over the place. And they've been happening here in Ann Arbor for more than 10 years. Yeah, isn't that magical? So we can't do it without folks like you showing up, without folks like Diane making meetups, and without the help of the library sponsoring it and making it possible for us to spend our time coordinating it. And of course, without Live to be our home base and to open our doors and set up all these chairs for us. They even tied up the mirror ball so that a shadow doesn't fall. There it is, across the thing. Isn't that nice? Thanks, Live. So tonight we are going to see John Heider telling us about the Bonefish, a $3,500 fish nobody can eat. We're going to hear from Surabhi Balachandar, and she is going to tell you about her reading project. If you are a nerd, then you have embarked on a project sometime in your life, something you were going to do all of, something you were going to read all of, or eat every kind of, or catalog every type of. And she's doing it, you guys, and she's killing it. So I highly recommend you follow her on Instagram. She'll give you the details. And then we've got Scott Vertical, who is going to take us deep into our nerdy past. And Scott is actually a Nerd Nite alumnus. He, 10 years ago on this very date, on this very stage, he took us down the path of Krypton's forgotten past. And he's going to take us on a tour of that one more time. So we're looking forward to all of it. We are very excited. But first, I'm going to ask you to please welcome to the stage, John Heider.
Thank you. Oh, am I up here? All right. Hi, ladies and gentlemen, nerd and nerdettes. My name is John Heider. I am neither an ichthyologist, biologist, statistician, or really historian, but I'm going to tell you tonight about the Florida bonefish and the Florida Keys Flats fishery and how much money and influence they bring to the Florida economy. This bonefish, you'll see photos in a minute, is not much on average bigger than 2 to 3 feet in length, doesn't weigh much more than 7 pounds, but each one that is caught in the Florida waters brings in $3,500 in business, and you can't keep them, you can't eat them, and we're gonna find out why. All right, so as I said, my name is John Heider. This is my second time up here. My understanding, Sarah, is the third time I don't have to bribe you, right? Right, okay. All right, that's my little humorous introduction there. All right, so this is the bonefish. Isn't it lovely? Kind of like silvery, little bit of orange, olive stripes up there. This is the bonefish. That's the fish that's worth $3,500 that no one can eat. So way back in the 1930s in the Florida Keys, anglers used to catch lots of bonefish and the other species of the Florida Keys flats, which were permit and tarpon. And what they do, you see these photographs, they take them back to the marina, take a nice photograph, and then dump them in trash barrels or throw them back into the ocean for the sharks because no one ate these fish and no one cared. And they just assumed that the ecology would just keep going on forever and ever. But now in these modern days, well, the fish of the Florida Keys have been found out to be much too valuable to be caught just once. Let's find out why. Okay, so but first, here's some terms. If I say bones, I mean the bonefish and not the bones on the right side. All right, if I say flats, I mean the flats of the shallow water fishery of the Florida Keys. When they say flats, they mean that most of the water in that area is relatively stable and kind of shallow. And I don't mean the flats shoes. And if I say Keys, I mean the group of islands that go from Key Largo down to Key West, and that derives from the word Cayo for Spanish for islet. And I don't mean the kind of keys that you open your house with. And if I say big three, I mean the big three species of the Florida flats, which would be bonefish, tarpon, and permit. Here's your bonefish. That's a permit down there. There's a big ass tarpon. Those things weigh up to 250 pounds. And I don't mean, when I say big three, I don't mean the car guys. Okay, so this story began with two guys and a fish. And those two guys were my father, that's John V. Heider on the left. The fishing guide is Rich Mitchell, he's the guy on the right, and they're holding a really nice bonefish that my father caught down in Isla Mirada in 2008. And here's the bonefish. All right. And during a later trip with the same guide, this guy is Rich Mitchell, he mentioned that a study had just been completed that year that showed that the average amount of money brought in for each bonefish caught in the Florida Keys was $3,500. And I didn't do much with that information at that time. I just kind of filed it away for later. And I thought, okay, well, that's kind of cool. So what the hell is so special about the bonefish? Let's find out more. Let's go into some basics for bonefish. Okay, so bones or albula vulpes, that's their Latin name, or is a type, I love this definition, a type of species of fish of the bonefish family Albulidae. Their Latin name, albula vulpes, means white fox. All right, large bonefish can get up to about 31 inches in length and maybe get to about 14 pounds. Probably the average size bonefish is about 27 inches and, 6 pounds. Bonefish reach sexual maturity at about 2 to 3 years, which is interesting because I reached it at 20, and they can live as long as 20 years of age. Now, they're a migratory fish of the tropical waters. They're mostly found in the Florida Keys and the Caribbean. They're also found in the Gulf of Mexico. There are some in the Indian Ocean, and there are even some off the west coast of Africa. And they eat benthic worms. Does anyone know what the benthic region of the ocean is? I had to look it up. You do? It's basically the shallow water, sandy, marly surface. So they eat benthic worms, mollusks, crustaceans, and small minnows, which sounds pretty delicious. All right, here's some basic anatomy of the bonefish. I had to guess on some of this stuff. They've got the basic dorsal fin, the pectoral fin. One of their most notable features is this deeply forked tail. You'll sometimes see that waving above the water. as these guys stick their head downs for the benthic worms and other things like that. All right. And so this is, what do we have here? Bonefish were once believed to be a single species, but they've since then found that there are 9 subspecies of bonefish. They mostly are silver colored. They can also have a little olive in their sides. And they are, as I said, they're found in the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, and the Indian Ocean. And this is the Florida Keys. We'll get back to that later. So why are they so sought after? So they're a strikingly beautiful fish that lives in these lovely emerald green waters. They're in usually 4 feet of water. You can see them from 100 feet away. You can cast to specific bonefish, and you can see them when they take the lure and just take off like a bat out of hell. These fish, this is not a great sharp image because I'm too cheap to pay for a high resolution image. But those in there, those are fish approaching a guy on the bow of a boat, and those are tarpon. So again, this is one of the big 3 species of the Florida Keys, and those are the guys that get to well over 225 pounds. But bonefish you can see as well as they're approaching your boat. Let me give you an idea again of why that's kind of cool. The typical depth that you're catching fish in South Florida that you eat, snapper, grouper, mahi-mahi, and Spanish mackerel, here they all are, they're way down. They're about 50 feet below the ocean, below the surface. You can't see them. They're just like little smudges, or they're even deeper. But the 3 species of the Florida Keys, the bonefish, permit, and tarpon, are caught in 4 feet of water. So that lends some excitement when you can see these fish right in front of you, and that's unique. Bonefish are speedy little bastards. They really are. They can get up to about 40 miles an hour, and they need that speed because they have to be able to get away from sharks and dolphins. They are not as fast as black marlin or the Indo-Pacific sailfish or the bluefin tuna, but they're definitely faster than mall walkers. Okay, that's just the damn truth. Okay, so here's a brief history of the decline of the flats fishery and the eventual study that pegged their value. In the 1990s, the Keys guides and anglers were noticing a drop in the numbers of bonefish that they were seeing, a noticeable drop. So in 2010, a bunch of guides and anglers got together, and they monitored from Key Largo down to the Marquesas, which is west of Key West, and they estimated that the then population was about 240,000 fish. This again was in 2010, which was a drop in 25% in 8 years. So something was going on. So given that the bonefish numbers were declining, the state of Florida finally figured out that they had to do something. Back in the days, you could keep, back before 2010 or 2013, you could keep a bonefish. You could only keep them if you were caught in a tournament. Most people don't eat them anyway because they're not considered palatable. But even the state of Florida figured out that that had to go because the numbers of the bonefish were dropping. So you could no longer keep them in tournaments. And that was codified into the angling rules by the state of Florida in 2013. And you'd think that would be making things better, and I think it has. Okay, so again, remember back in the early days, the big 3 species were caught, and here's a guy named Charles M. Cook and his then record 16-pound bonefish caught in Hawaii in 1948, and that fish was probably not returned to the waters. That's taken in looks like a shed, so that bonefish probably died. Yeah, I know, boo. Thank you for the booze. Okay, so again, here's the old way. Here's a nice trio of ladies with a bonefish. That's a bonefish, you can't see that. So that bonefish is probably caught and then thrown away. And here's the new way, okay? You catch your bonefish, you put it back in the water, and it grows nice and big. To cut this down to a nice basic graphic, okay? Anglers will spend more money to catch more fish and bigger fish. That's just the basic thing. So state of Florida figured out that they needed to increase the numbers of these bonefish and keep them steady if possible. So here's the commission study that set the bones value. In 2013, there was a nonprofit based in Key Largo called the Bonefish and Tarpon Trust. They commissioned a study, and it was taken up by a guy named Tony Fedler, PhD, out of the University of Miami. And what he did was he took about a year and analyzed a bunch of data, interviewed a bunch of businesses in South Florida, and came up with this study. If you guys want to look it up online, it's called The Economic Impact of the Florida Keys Flats Fishery. It's a PDF about 25 pages long. Good reading. What he found was that the overall economic impact of the flat species, again, that's the three species, the bonefish, permanent tarpon, $465 million a year, and that's just for the Florida Keys area. That's not for the entire state. Bonefish alone accounted for $180 million of that take. He based his studies on interviewing, he interviewed guides, motel owners, tackle shops, restaurants, wherever anglers were thought to be spending money. And he concluded that each of the approximate 50,000 bonefish that were caught in a year were worth $3,500 in business to South Florida. And if those fish lived a full 20 years, they brought in $75,000. Again, let me point out, his study only covered where these species were caught, which is this is the Florida Keys, and this is South Florida. This is called the Florida Bay. He only studied that area. All of these big three species are also caught and found all around the coast of Florida. He did not study that impact. There was another guy, though, 7 years before him, Dr. Jerry Alt of Miami's Rosenstiel School. He estimated that bonefish alone brought in $1 billion annually to the state's economy, which is pretty neat. So whether bonefish bring in $180 million just for the Florida Keys area, or if they bring in $1 billion for the entire state, it's a tremendously valuable fishery. All right. So again, why? Because anglers spend money at all of these places. And when they come down to South Florida to go after bonefish, permanent tarpon, they're not just there for a day or two. It's usually 3 or 4 or 5 days. And they're going to motels, they're renting cars, they're hiring guides, they're going to strip clubs, they're going everywhere. They're spending money all over the place. So, we're not going to focus on this. This is silly. This just shows Florida's recreational fishing economy supports 56,000 jobs. That's kind of crazy and a lot. Okay, so here's one of my last parts. John's personal account of the revenue generated for local businesses from the pursuit of Florida bonefish, a decidedly non-scientific look at the flats fisheries economic value. Okay, so here's what happened. In April of this year, I went down to South Florida. I went down to the Miami area. My father lives on Key Biscayne, which is near Miami, and nearby is a little island called Virginia Key. For 3 mornings in a row, I went to Virginia Key. I walked into the waters with my fly fishing rod, and I went after bonefish. And what I'm going to show you in the next page are all the expenses I racked up in 3 days, dividing in half my plane fare, my motel, and my car rental, because I wasn't just there to fish for bonefish, but that's just to be fair. So let me just show you. This is what I spent. And let me point out, only one of these expenses is made up. And, it's right towards the bottom, but I spent $1,082 in 3 days mostly going after bonefish. Did anyone find the one made up? You're right, it's a Taco Bell, because that stuff is perverse. I'm not kidding. It's awful. All right, so $1,082 over 3 days. We don't need to see that. That's silly. Okay, and here I am. Here's Big John with his first ever bonefish off Virginia Key. That's Virginia Key in the background. I'm also pointing to where there was an Instagram model that was yelling at me when I was fishing. I think she thought I was going to hook her, but that's my success. There you go. Yeah, thank you very much. And let me point out one thing. My relatively low cost of $1,082 over 3 days would have been a lot more if I'd had to hire a guide. Guides are often needed to find where these bonefish, permit, and tarpon are because they're spread out over hundreds of miles of water. Guides are $800 a day. So you can see how it adds up. If you're in South Florida for 3 or 4 days and you're going after bonefish and you're hiring guides and you're renting a motel room and you're buying tackle and you've got to buy a fishing license, it adds up. So here's the end of the story in a way. What is the future of the Big Three Keys fishery? In a word, it's imperiled. You guys might have heard about 2 months ago, the waters of the Florida Keys got up to 101 degrees. That did kill and will kill a bunch of coral where the bonefish and these other species begin their lives and they feed and they spawn. South Florida, here's a quick shot of, this is called Duck Key down in the Florida Keys. All those little dots and squares and rectangle squiggles, those are all homes and businesses. There's nothing like the Florida Keys to be overdeveloped. And when you overdevelop, you get water pollution in the ocean. Believe it or not, pharmaceuticals end up in the bonefish blood. They have done analysis of that. And what hopefully the state of Florida can figure out and what we can all figure out is how to protect this fishery and this area in general, because it's a very, very special area. Here are some of the screenshots from my research. You can see there's my favorite, Florida's bonefish are on drugs, which was the one that found that the bonefish had pharmaceuticals in them. And that's the end. All right. Time for questions? Yeah, if you guys have any questions, scream them out. Yes, ma'am.
How many times has a 20-year-old bonefish been caught?
Oh, yeah, sure. How many times has a 20-year-old bonefish been caught? Honestly, I don't know. But in one of the photos, I could try to scroll back, the bonefish that my father caught was tagged. So if a tagged bonefish is caught, you can tell how old it is, where it was caught. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, they don't have, driver's license with them. So I would assume, yeah, that a lot of them get quite old and quite big and quite lovely. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 Well, he made a good point that sometimes, quite often, you can't see the fish coming to you. They're not nice and clearly visible right off the bow of your boat. However, sometimes they are. I did want to point out that bonefish, because they are silvery, sandy colored, can absolutely blend into the bottom of the sand and you won't see them. Sometimes you can. Sometimes all you see is this little wake going across the water. Any other? Yes? That's a good question, because these studies were, I'm sorry, what's the price? What she's asking, what is the cost? What do these bonefish bring in each year adjusted for inflation? Since these studies were 10 years ago, it's probably quite a bit more. However, all of the big three species, the bonefish, permit, and tarpon, are all suffering declines in population. So again, hopefully state of Florida and other figures can figure out how to stabilize those populations.
One more question into that.
She's asking how are these regulations enforced? Quite honestly, because there are probably very few conservation officers over the Florida Keys waters, which are literally thousands of square miles. A lot of it is just from people being good and other anglers and guides calling them on it if they find that they're bringing back fish that they shouldn't. Because there's you could get away with a lot if you wanted to, but there's hopefully a lot of good sentiment going on down there. All right.
Woo! Way to go, John. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how John spent his summer vacation. I guess spring break. All right, awesome. Okay. Oh, that's thanks. Look, thanks to me, but also everybody else, including Mr. Pickle. All right, folks, you have been good and sat still. I think you all deserve another drink. So go ahead and help yourself. We'll be back in 10 minutes with Surabhi Balachander.
Okay, I think we're gonna bring it on back, everybody, to our second speaker of Nerd Night for tonight. It's Surabhi Balachander. She will be, she's on a journey of reading a book set or in each of the US 50 states. Surabhi is a PhD candidate in English language and literature at the University of Michigan, where she studies rurality, race, and environment in American literature from 1920 to 2020. So I'm sure she'll be bringing in a lot of good stuff as she tells us all about her journey. Please welcome Surabhi.
Alrighty, I'm gonna keep on my mask since everyone seems to have the same cold that I know. So can everyone hear me? Cool. Hi, as was said, my name is Surabhi. I've lived in Ann Arbor for about 5 years. I live on the north side, which is the best part of town. And I'm a PhD candidate in English at U of M. First of all, I just really like to thank Sarah for inviting me to do this. This is super fun. And thanks to everyone who's helping put it on, and everyone who's here. So in 2023, I'm working, I need to change a slide, on a personal project that I'm calling Reading 50 States. This is emphatically not for work, although it does maybe overlap with what I do for work. I'm one of those people who lets it bleed. And every week I'm reading one book that's set in or about each of the 50 US states. The book can be in any genre. To count, I'm saying that it needs a significant investment in the state, even if it's partially set elsewhere. What that means is highly subjective. After all, this is a project for fun. So I'm trying to mix it up, read some different things, and think more deeply about each of the 50 states. And I'm doing one book per week and proceeding in alphabetical order through the states. Here's my schedule. I have mocked it up really nicely. And I'm going from, Alabama first week of January to Wyoming at the end. I thought that would be a fun way to both stay organized and kind of get some geographical variation as I move through instead of going like from the east to the west or the west to the east or something. For the last 2 weeks of the year, I'm planning to look at DC and some of the US territories. Haven't decided exactly what I'm doing there, but that should be fun too. And then I am sharing what I'm doing because we have this image that writing and reading are such antisocial activities. Like you sit in a room and do it by yourself, never talk to anyone. I don't like that. I think reading can be really social. And one of the ways that I'm pursuing that is just by sharing what I'm doing on my Instagram. If you asked me like 3 years ago if I would be doing a talk where I showed my Instagram, I would have looked at you very confusedly. But no, I am doing a talk and sharing my Instagram because it's been a great way to find community around this project. So if you want to learn more about what I've actually been reading, I put it all up here. And alongside reading one book every week that I've never read before, I'm also taking this as an opportunity to reflect on what I have read before that's set in different states. And I'm recommending some books that I've read before that I enjoyed in each state. So kind of creating this canon of states of literature about the 50 states. And at this point, I've read through Oregon. When I wrote the notes for this talk, I had read through Oklahoma. I finished Oregon like today. So September, I'm getting, 3/4 of the way through. So why am I doing this? Good question to ask. I've always been fascinated by similar lists that people have made and posted online. So in my free time, I would sometimes look up these lists and go like, what have I read here? What have I never heard of? What are people defining as literature from all across the country? So these lists really come in all forms. They're posted everywhere from LitHub to NPR to Goodreads. Autostraddle made one that's all books by and about queer women and non-binary folks. The New York Times did a Valentine's Day feature that was all broadly defined love stories. So there's so many different things. One that was really recent, started after I started doing this, and that was really fascinating in its format, was the writer Susan Straight made a list that she collaborated with a GIS specialist. And so they location tagged an exact GPS coordinate for each of the books she put on her list. So that was really cool to zoom through and think about her definitions of region. And like a lot of the best books lists that you might find of any format, a lot of these had more white male writers than any other kind of writer. So I was interested in seeing how I could expand what a lot of these lists are doing and think about pursuing some of my own interests and what I like to read in my spare time while building out this canon of the 50 states. Another reason that I wanted to do this is I'm from a frequently maligned state. I grew up in Indiana, and then I went to college in California, where people would ask me all the time if I was from Illinois or Iowa or even Ohio. Most often they would ask me if I was from India. And people would also ask me a lot whether Idaho was in the Midwest. So I concluded that a lot of people do not know things about where anything is in the US, especially the Midwest. It was exhausting. So I find value in every corner of the US, and I wanted to explore more. Like, I don't know that much about the Northeast, for example. Wanted to learn more. And then I mentioned my academic background a little bit earlier. And while this is explicitly a for fun project, my academic background is relevant. My dissertation, as I forgot I put in my bio, is about rural America, race, and the environment. So I'm very interested always in how people write about relationships to place, local and regional belonging, rural identity, and especially in all those things in the writings of those who are either marginalized in a particular place or are marginalized from understandings of that place. So I've always been interested in thinking about American identities through literature with a focus on place. And then a fun fact about me, when I was studying for my prelims exams for my PhD program, which involved reading about 175 books to broaden my knowledge of my field, this was also the summer of 2020, so I did not have that much to do. I made this like low rent version of Susan Straight's map and like tagged every location in the books I was reading. So I looked at that for the first time in several years and put it on the left half of the slide. And I continue that fun habit through Instagram, where I can geotag an Instagram story and it'll automatically make a map. So it looks much better than this one. So I put that on the right half of the slide. So I'm always interested in thinking about literature and place. So in a nutshell, why am I doing this? I'm a Midwesterner, I'm a literary scholar, and appropriately for this, I'm a huge nerd. So how do I find the books is another question. So first of all, I made this little graphic of everything I've read so far. I do not expect people to be able to like understand all of this from the slide. You can talk to me about it. I have lists that I can share with you later on. But finding the books has been kind of an iterative process, ongoing. I went through books when I decided to do this that I'd already wanted to read and thought like, okay, how can I make sure I get to some of these books, have them represent a particular state? And I got to books that I've been meaning to read for a long time, like Louis Erdrich's The Sentence, and that way. I got some inspiration from those lists that I put up on the previous slide, looking at what people had recommended. I asked a lot on social media, so every month I'm asking people, tell me what to read for the next month's states. And that's really yielded some really great stuff. Searching the name of the state in the AADL catalog has been a surefire hit. Sometimes it doesn't always work. Sometimes I get things that were published in a certain state because the publisher is part of the metadata, but sometimes it works. And one time I started on Idaho, and then I really wasn't feeling what I had planned to read for Idaho. So I said, oh no, I need to ask AADL Shelf Service, highly recommend. That was very useful, and they gave me many things, but among them was Andrea Williams's The Longest Night, which is about a nuclear accident in Idaho, and I thought it was fantastic. So thank you again, AADL. And feel free, since you're hearing me talk, to suggest things to me. I'm going to put up my contact information at the end. I love hearing about more recommendations for what to read. So onto some themes and trends and patterns that I've noticed so far. For this talk, I did kind of a little audit of what I've done to this point. So I've got a spread among a bunch of different genres. I've read more novels than anything, but I've kind of bopped around between a bunch of different things. Which states have been the easiest or hardest? Some states, you might guess, have been super easy, like there are a million books set in California. Hard to pick just one. There are others that have rich literary legacies. Georgia, I also had a ton of things I wanted to read there. The hardest so far have been Arkansas, where for some reason, every book I found seemed to be either by John Grisham or about the Clintons, who are related, by the way. And Connecticut is in the Northeast, which I don't know that well, and it took a while to find something about Connecticut. Missouri, I cannot tell you why Missouri was hard. I really don't understand, but somebody on Instagram recommended me a memoir about abolition that definitely wasn't advertised as a book about Missouri, but absolutely was. So thank you to that person. The oldest and newest of books I've read, just for fun. The oldest one I read was The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass from Maryland, which was published in 1845. Really important, really heavy text that I'd been wanting to get to for a while. And the newest book I read was published this year. It was dubbed J.J. Lee's In Limbo, which is a graphic memoir detailing their time growing up in New Jersey. So I read according to my interests, so they're biased in certain ways. I felt like reading more recent things, so you can see that the publication decades are really bunched up in the 2020s, 2010s. Even with Frederick Douglass in there, the average publication year is 2010 of everything I've read so far. It's mostly writers of color, mostly women writers, and so more of what I'm looking for, diversifying canons, things that play to my interests, since this is, after all, for fun. And one open question that I've been thinking of as I move through this project is how much of what I find is about the actual literature that states have, and how much is just about how things are described, marketed, promoted, like how I found it so hard to find a Missouri book, and that one wasn't promoted that way. So I'm wondering what I could learn if I did more research or different research about what exists about different states. So really quick, I could not talk about 36 books. We would be here all night. But I'm going to talk about 4 that I've really enjoyed, just to give you a taste of the kind of reading I've been doing. So the very first book I read was really good. It was Dolan Perkins Valdez's novel, Take My Hand, which came out last year. So it was for Alabama. I read it first. And it follows a middle-class Black nurse who is on Montgomery, Alabama, kind of going out to a poor Black family in the sticks and forming a professional, bleeding into personal relationship with them. And it explores these really important questions of accountability and allyship and some really dark episodes in U.S. history. I highly recommend. It was disturbing, but very well done and a page turner. A very different mood was Quan Barry's We Ride Upon Sticks, which is set in Danvers, Massachusetts, which I learned from this novel was once part of Salem, Massachusetts, and that's the part where the Salem witch trials took place. And the characters in this book are very aware of their history. It is set in the 1980s, aggressively so. There is a sentient hairstyle called the Claw that one character has. And it follows a girls' field hockey team as they kind of come of age and maybe use some witchcraft to try to win their hockey season. Would never have read that if not for this, and I really enjoyed it. I finally read Louise Erdrich's The Sentence, which people have recommended to me so many times. It lived up to the hype. It came out in 2021, but is set between October 2019 and October 2020. So it's kind of Louise Erdrich's pandemic novel. It's set in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where she owns a real-life bookstore, and the protagonist works at the actual bookstore Louise Erdrich owns. Louise Erdrich is a minor character in her own novel, which is kind of fun. And it kind of processes everything that it meant to live in Minneapolis during the chaotic year that was 2020, while the bookstore employee tries to kind of exorcise the ghost of this annoying customer they had from the store. And then the last one I'll talk about, I read it for New Mexico. It mostly is set in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, but through letters, spends a lot of time in Southern California as well. It follows a young trans woman and it's written all as letters that she writes to a rock musician who's heavily based on Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. I won't say that much more because I feel like it's interesting to just see how this novel unfolds. I found it to be super unique and imaginative, and thinking about connections within place and across place. It was really beautiful. So I invite you, if you would like, to read along with me. There's no earthly reason to read as much as I do in general. So there's so many correct ways to do this. You do not have to read a book a week. You do not have to go in alphabetical order. There's so many different ways you could do it. All it's really about is trying to broaden your view of what counts as US literature, read about parts of the country you haven't already. So it could take you as long as you want, or you could do as much as you want, but I've had a lot of fun, so I would encourage folks to try this out if it interests them. There's so many different emphases you could put to, like, I've talked about how I have read things according to my interests, but you could read like in a genre that you like. You could change things up. There's even a mystery series that is by a single author that has an installment in every state. I wouldn't want to read that, but I feel like a lot of people could. And so if you do read along with me, I invite you to reach out to me. Even if you don't read along with me, I invite you to reach out to me. I feel like one of the most fun parts of this has been being able to do it socially, talk to people about what they think counts for their home states, or what states they don't really know much about and would want to know more about, what they wish I would read, what they wish I hadn't read. No one has really done that yet, but I would be open to it if they did. So I have never made this QR code before. I feel very new agey. If you want to follow me on Instagram, if you are not an Instagrammer, I was not until fairly recently. I put up my email. So I'm happy to hear from anyone. If you want to hear more about the specific books I read, I'm happy to chat about this. That's the most fun part. So thanks so much for having me here, and I'm happy to take some questions.
You have to say, this hand, shut up.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'll answer in reverse order. So the first question was, no worries. Two of them are very short, it's true. The first question was, how do I pick? Do I pick based on where the author is from or where the book is from? And I think about where the book is set. I'm interested in how people, no matter where they're necessarily from, imagine place. So I'm definitely thinking about where the book itself is set. And then I was asked where I read for Connecticut and what I read for Michigan. So for Connecticut, which was kind of hard to find for some reason, I wound up reading something that, this may have been cheating because I think I might have read this book when I was like 5, but I don't really remember. So I reread it. I counted it. Tommy DePaola's memoir, illustrated 26 Fairmount Avenue, about growing up in suburban Connecticut. Super sweet. Love it. And for Michigan, I read Anna Rose Johnson's The Star That Always Stays, which is a children's novel about a Native and white woman growing up in the UP in the early 20th century. It was like a very quiet, like retro sensibility historical novel. Should I call on people? Should you call on people? Okay, cool.
So I'm Palestinian, and I did a project about, for us, like there's a lot of literature about like how indigenous populations sort of relate to place and to land. And I was wondering, like in your sort of journey here, do you find that different groups of people or different authors will sort of like describe this relationship to place or to even just the physical land very differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yes, sorry. The question was talking about indigenous relationships to place and whether I find that different authors write differently, describe differently their relationship to place. I'm a scholar of multi-ethnic American literature, so I think about this question all of the time. And to like, I sometimes joke that this project is a little like the US Senate, because like every state gets one book, although this does not determine who gets appointed to the federal judiciary, so I think it's fine. But yeah, I think that different writers are thinking about things in such different ways. Like I have read a bunch of indigenous writers for this, and in general, who often think about the constructs of the American nation in such different ways since they're occupied by it. And I've done, for Indiana, my home state, I read an Indonesian author in translation from his 2-year visit to Bloomington, Indiana, writing about it as very much an outsider. So there's definitely a huge element to which pre-existing identities intersect with state identity, place identity, which is exactly what I love about this. A favorite, fun, or surprising fact about what? About a particular state. What is a good? have to like look at it.
What has surprised you?
One thing I was surprised by, I thought that it was going to be super hard to find a book for Delaware because I feel like Delaware is the most mysterious state to me in general. I don't really know what goes on there, but I know a little bit more because I immediately found The Book of Unknown Americans by Cristina Enriquez, which was this delightful novel about immigrants, mostly from Latin America, and a community in suburban Delaware and them adjusting to life and building their own community in this apartment building. So I'm surprised at how much I loved the book about Delaware.
Two questions. Have you noticed a change in style of writing over the 1840s to now, all the books you read? And then second, has that map turned into a travel map for you?
Okay, so first I was asked if I've noticed a change in style over the time periods that I've read. Yes, I've read mostly really recent books, but in my life of reading, there's like so many changes, and so much of what people are even allowed to engage with, who's writing, who's getting published, has changed a ton. And then the second question was, has this turned into a travel map? Maybe.
I think this is our last.
Cool.
We have done past annual reading projects, and we have one lined up for 2024.
The question is, have I done past annual reading projects and do I have one lined up for 2024? No, I have not. This was something that I was like vaguely interested in doing, and then I just made it an annual project, which got me to actually do it and talk to people about it. I don't know. We'll find out. There's always so much to read that it may happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Water bottle. Thank you so much, Surabhi. That was fantastic. Because she made a plug, I'm going to leave up the, let's stay here for a second so you can find the contact info if you have any titles to drop in her inbox or if you want to follow her on Instagram. I found Surabhi. She came to me through Instagram. I mean, I came to her and said, do you want to talk about this at Nerd Nite? Because I'm just super into this project. I think it's so cool. As a reader, a librarian myself, you know, I've got a great love of books. But I will say as well, because you were so kind to plug this, I will mention a service that your local friendly library, the Ann Arbor District Library, offers is a service called Shelf Service. And if you go to the webpage and you choose services, Shelf Service is one of the options, and you just fill out a little form and you're like, I really like Daniel Silva books. Can you recommend other books like that? And then we will pick out, because we look at these books every day and we look at our favorite books and we're like, why doesn't anyone choose you, friend? Because it's great, but you haven't tried it. I know it's a bad cover. It's a really good book. Like there's so many books like that. And when people ask, you know, oh, I'm just looking for a good read. Oh, I like historical fiction. Oh, I hated this. Top it. You know, like we love this challenge. And you can be like, give me 5. You can be like, give me 15. And we put them in a bag and you pick them up. And if you don't read them, we never know. It's judgment free. So I highly recommend it. Shelf Service. All right. That is enough of my commercial. I'm going to give us another break because, again, you were very good children and you get to go have another drink. I'll see you in 10 minutes.
All right, Nerd Night continues. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So we'll get into our third and final speaker for the night. His name is Scott Vertical, and he is the morning host of Ann Arbor's 107.1. Has been collecting comics for over 40 years, and I happen to know also that Scott's married. And I just want to say, as someone who also collects a lot of comics, thank you, Cindy, for allowing Scott to do that. I can't imagine what that looks like. So, thank you. So Scott's here to talk about Superman's home planet, which is the planet Krypton. And so modern depictions of the planet Krypton have been quite sterile, but it hasn't always been this way. So Scott's here to talk about some cool, weird stories of representations of the planet Krypton. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I have been making room. I have been getting rid of comics. I've been whittling it down, so Cindy is in a much better mood about all my comics these days. So, all right. I hope you do forgive the crudeness of my presentation. I am not a presentator maker. This is unacceptable. This took me 20 minutes. So, and this is the only slide I have. No, I have it on my phone here. So I want to thank Emily and Sarah for the invitation to come out here today. I want to thank Rich Reddy from the library for hooking it all up. And how about another hand for John and Sarabi? It's hard to get up here and talk about something, even if you're really into it. So good job. And it was excellent stuff. And I don't think I would have been invited up here, and understandably so, if I wasn't on the radio. The connection wouldn't have been made. So I feel like that gives me a little bit of leeway to go ahead and do a quick commercial. Now, first of all, the radio is something your grandparents used to listen to before they asked you to help them create a Spotify account. So, but if you haven't listened to 107.1 before, or if it's been a while, I do hope you check us out. We've dusted off some old stuff out of the archives. We put some stuff back in the archives. And we're sprucing things up a little bit. Tomorrow morning after 8 o'clock, I talked to Grammy winner John Batiste. Every Friday is Feature Artist Friday. So Duran Duran every hour on Friday. Every Monday is New Music Monday, and that's exactly what it sounds like. And then something that has not been announced anywhere yet. Homecoming weekend is next weekend, and we're going to be playing all made in Michigan, not all made in Michigan artists, but every hour a made in Michigan artist for homecoming weekend. And we'll be doing that more often. You're going to hear a lot more local stuff, a lot more Michigan music on 107.1. And when you go to the website, AnnArbor's107.1.com, you can win a trip to see Boy Genius and baseball in Boston. And while you're there, you can download the app on the website, AnnArbor's107.1.com. You can listen anywhere you go. That's it. Thank you for letting me do that. I'm not going to mention the radio for the rest of the thing. It's Superman time. All right. I also want to apologize for the misunderstanding. I did do this speech 10 years ago, but it was in Detroit. And anyone there? Anyone there? Yeah? Yes, I knew. Yes, you were there. But it was 10 years ago, this past June. And when I first gave this talk, I was angry old man yelling at a cloud saying, comics aren't fun anymore. And so when I went over and looked at this again, and I decided I'm going to tone it down a little bit and don't be so angry about everything. And since then, when I first wrote it, it was lamenting the fact that there was no path for kids to get hooked on comics. Used to be you can go to a comic book store and just grab anything. You pick up any Batman comic and be like, cool, give that to my kid. You can't do that today. A Batman comic today could have him beating somebody up to a bloody pulp, and then the Joker, he literally cut his own face off. The Joker literally cut his own face off. You don't hand that to a kid. So that was my original thing behind this. But since then, all the comic companies have done a really good job at creating this path for new readers, young readers. They have a lot of great young adult stuff, a lot of fun things. And it's much better than it used to be. So with that said, let's get to it. Superman was introduced in 1938 by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, but readers didn't know anything about his planet of origin until 10 years later, when the first comprehensive origin story of Superman was told. And of course, a lot has changed since then. Kids used to be the main audience for comic books. They were written for 10-year-olds, and they would sell, and I'm not making, this is not an exaggeration, they'd sell 1 million copies a month per issue. and then the kids would just jam them in their back pockets and they'd never see them again. And that's what they were designed to do. They were just a kids medium, disposable, frivolous. And nowadays they're written for adults. They're written for 30-year-olds and older. And they put them right in a plastic bag and it goes in the closet and you never see it again, or my basement. And you just never see them again. But I'm here to share with you today how much fun comics used to be. And when they were written for kids, they were a blast. And we're going to use Krypton as an example. When I first started collecting comic books in the 80s, DC was my publisher. Fell in love with DC Comics. They had a huge, rich history. It went all the way back to 1938, and they embraced that history. And they had everything. Everything happened. But over time, obviously, you can't have a 29-year-old Superman be 29 years old forever and still have gotten his start during World War II. So what they did was they came up with the parallel worlds thing that everybody knows about now, multiverses and stuff. And as time went on, these things were tweaked. And so what they ended up doing was taking the original heroes and shunting them off to a place called Earth 2. So now we've got two, Earth 1 and Earth 2. Earth 2 is where the World War II Superman still fought his battles. And Earth 1 is where our modern day Superman would fight his battles. And over time, it became a little bit confusing. It was determined at one point that all of this was going to happen. I'm sorry, I lost my spot. Okay, so here's what would happen. So because there was these different worlds, there was Superman from our world would team up with Superman from Earth 2, even though he's the same guy. And again, comics were made for kids, even up through the 80s. This is from the 80s. Superman meets Superboy. Superboy was from Earth Prime. This particular character was from Earth Prime, which is our Earth. We had a guy named Clark Kent on this Earth who got superpowers, and he met Superman. And this actually really happened. But over time, there was this infinite number of Earths. So Captain Marvel or Shazam lived on Earth S. You may have heard of the Watchmen. Well, they were based on heroes that lived on Earth 4. Evil version of the Justice League called the Crime Syndicate lived on Earth 3. And so there are many, multiple versions of heroes, as you're very familiar with the multiverse these days. In 1978, Superman of Earth 2 married Lois Lane. In 1979, Batman of Earth 2 actually died, like, permanently. And he never came back, which doesn't happen in comic books. Now, if this sounds confusing, the editors at DC Comics thought so as well. So they came up with this event called Crisis on Infinite Earths. And this is around the time I got hooked on comics. This blew my mind. So they destroyed any superfluous worlds and characters and condensed it all onto one planet into what hoped would be a cohesive universe. And it kind of worked, but that's a presentation for a different day. In the aftermath of the crisis, Superman was rebooted and relaunched by John Byrne, a Marvel Comics superstar. He came over from Marvel Comics, started Superman basically over again from scratch. And it worked. It worked really, really well. It brought in a new generation of readers, and because you didn't need all of a sudden 50 years of history to understand what was happening in a Superman comic. So it was a very, very good idea. Unfortunately, one of the things that got lost was Krypton. I mean, he still comes from Krypton, but up until the mid-'80s, Krypton was a fascinating place that had Flash Gordon-style jetpacks and ray guns, and it was just a lot of fun, which we are about to get into. And John Byrne turned it into kind of a cold, sterile world, which, again, worked okay at the time. But on this world, you didn't procreate the normal way. You hatched babies in this thing, and you didn't touch each other. And it's a very strange, cold world that I did not necessarily enjoy. But before this, Krypton was, this is better than I thought it was going to be. Okay, cool. This is a map of Krypton. This is the New World Hemisphere, and this is the Old World Hemisphere. I wish we could read these. We're going to talk about Kandor in a little bit, but Kryptonopolis is the capital city of Krypton, just like how we have an Earthopolis, the capital city of Earth. But they had a lot of cool things on Krypton. They had the Jewel Mountains, the gold volcanoes. We'll get to this one, Magnetic Mountain, where you don't want to take your car keys up there. You'll never get those back. The Striped River, the Fungus Caverns, the Glass Forest, where the metal-eating beasts lived. And down here, I'm gonna read this very carefully. You can't make this out, and I apologize for that. But I'm gonna make, because I need to read this correctly. This map was drawn up in the early 70s. And it does mention Vantho Island, which is down here. And that is the home of Krypton's highly developed black race. And this is a direct quote from the editor at the time, E. Nelson Bridwell, in 1971. He said, "You see blacks in the US because their ancestors were brought here as slaves. That never happened on Krypton." So they stayed on an island, apparently, Vantho Island. Let's move on and pretend that didn't happen. All right. Superman from the 50s through the 80s was often presented as a tragic figure. I mean, he's an immigrant who can literally never, ever, ever go home again. And in stories from this silver age of comics, he was often, he pined for home quite often. He was truly the last son of Krypton. There was no other Kryptonians. He was the last one. Of course, that didn't stop the writers of these stories from constantly introducing other survivors of Krypton. And an easy way to do that was the discovery of the Phantom Zone. Now, Superman's father, Jor-El, discovered the Phantom Zone. He was Krypton's preeminent scientist, after all. And the Phantom Zone was introduced in the comics in 1961. Jor-El thought it would be a humane way to punish prisoners. In the zone, people became ghost-like corporeal beings who communicated with each other using telepathy only to be able to observe the real world from a distance. Now, you know the Phantom Zone from the movies, obviously, the 1978 movie. In 1978, Marlon Brando sent Terrence Stamp and his friends to the Phantom Zone for crimes against Krypton. In the movie, the method for sending people to the Phantom Zone is very complicated. There's a ray of light, there's these swirling rings, and then there's also the album cover to Queen's Greatest Hits. And that's how you get in the Phantom Zone. But in the comic books, it was much simpler. Much simpler. This little thing here is the Phantom Zone projector. And there's another better picture down here. This glorified flashlight has two buttons on it. A black one that sends you into the zone, and a white one gets you out. There's no safety switch, so just be careful where you point it. In this panel, this is from Superboy number 104 in 1963, showing Jor-El demonstrating the device on his wife Lara in front of the Science Council. And people in the Phantom Zone people not in the Phantom Zone could communicate and observe the prisoners by using a device called the Zonophone. So that's Superboy communicating with the Phantom Zone. And that's how you bring Kryptonians into the comic books, even though it blew up. Jax-Ur down here is said to be the first Kryptonian imprisoned in the Phantom Zone. He accidentally destroyed the moon Wegthor, killing 500 of its colonists while intending to destroy a passing asteroid. General Drew Zod created an army of robots to take over Krypton after that happened. He was defeated and he was sentenced to 40 years in the Phantom Zone. And Faora, at the end there, was a stone-cold killer and a martial arts master. She kept men in concentration camps, tortured and killed them for reasons only known to her, and she was another prisoner of the Phantom Zone. And I mention them specifically because the Phantom Zone survived the destruction of Krypton, they would often team up and escape in different various clever ways and mess with Superboy and Superman. These are the three bad guys from the Man of Steel movie. The original Superman movie from 1978 is Non-Ursa and General Zod. They are two different. For some reason, they didn't use these. But the Man of Steel movie, Zack Snyder's Man of Steel movie, is these three here. All right. Now, lest you think that only criminals survived the destruction of Krypton, you should also know that whole cities survived the destruction of Krypton, believe it or not. Let's see here. Superman's cousin, Kara Zor-El, was born on Argos City. Argos City was flung free into space when Krypton exploded, as cities do when planets explode. So it was flung free into space, and it also fortunately came with a bubble of air, which I believe is in one of these captions. It has a bubble of air that saved them, and a food machine. This is a food machine that will give them food indefinitely, so they're good. They are fine. However, the nuclear explosion that destroyed Krypton turned their chunk of land into kryptonite, which is what happens that's just what happens. Now, luckily, Jor-El's brother, Zor-El, was also a scientist, and he happened to have miles and miles of lead laying around in his shop. And so they rolled it onto the asteroids to protect them from the kryptonite. You know, your typical big, long, miles long rolls of lead that you keep in your scientific thing. Unfortunately, about 15 years after this happened, a meteor shower started breaking through the lead rolls, the lead lining. They only had the one roll. So Argo City started falling apart and started the same problem that happened on Krypton. So that eventually Zor-El sent his daughter Kara to Earth, where she became Supergirl and hung out with Superman. Again, more Kryptonians, even though he's the last one. So what Kara didn't know is that before Argo City succumbed to the kryptonite radiation, her parents escaped to the conveniently named Survival Zone, which is very similar to the Phantom Zone. And some years later, Supergirl rescued her parents, shrunk them down, and put them in a bottle, but not just any bottle, the bottled city of Kandor. You laugh, but this means a lot to me, man. Kandor was the capital city of Krypton. It was captured before the planet's explosion by the evil Brainiac. Brainiac is a robot-like alien from the planet Kolu, boasting a 12th level intelligence, and he roamed the universe, visiting planets, shrinking cities very small, and putting them in bottles because comic books. After rescuing the bottled city from Brainiac, Superman put it in his Arctic fortress of solitude, and for years he tried to restore Kandor to its original size, but it was thwarted by things like shortage of a certain element, or the instability of the process, or not being able to find a new planet for the Kandorians to go to. But for the sake of a good story, there was always a way to shrink and grow a few people at a time to go in and out of the bottled city of Kandor. And it gave writers an interesting way for Superman to regularly visit and be visited by his Kryptonian counterparts. And for example, sometimes he would visit Kandor with his pal, Jimmy Olsen. This is Superman and Jimmy Olsen. And they would fly around with jetpacks because they didn't have powers in Kandor, because it was under a red sun simulator thing, comic books. And so they had to have jetpacks in the bottle and acted like Batman and Robin, because when Superman has a day off, why not go act like Batman? Yeah, that sounds like fun. Now, Teen Titan fans might recognize their names. This is Nightwing and Flamebird. Those are both names of Teen Titans, but Superman and Jimmy Olsen had that name originally. Kandor was eventually grown to full size in 1979, when Superman finally got around to really actually trying. He finally did it. Good job. Excuse me. In a classic adventure from 1960, Superman was trying to defeat a monster out in deep space when suddenly he realized he was flying too fast and ended up going back in time, flung back to Krypton's past. So under a red sun, he loses his powers, he lands on the planet, and he accidentally stumbles upon a movie being filmed on Krypton in the past. And so there he meets an actress, so she'll be on the next slide, named Lila Lerol. And he accidentally stumbles upon his parents as well, as one does when you go back in time to a different planet. He traveled the planet with his dad. His dad does not know that it's his son. And he's like, oh, hi, I'm a stranger, just happened to be here. And so they're flying around. And this is one of my favorite panels, because it's just written so strange. It's a strange way to write things. They're flying past the gold volcano. And Superman says, great Scott, it's erupting gold. Which, yeah, that's cool. But then Jor-El says, unfortunate, isn't it, that gold is so common on Krypton? It's worthless. I don't know why you would say that. It's like if you flew past the Earth volcano and went, isn't it unfortunate that lava is worthless? Yeah. Anyway, so he flies around with his dad, and while he's there, he falls in madly in love with this actress, Lila Laryl. And she shows him around Krypton as well. They visit the Rainbow Falls and the Fire Falls and all the different falls. And he finds time while he's in the past on Krypton, he finds time to check in on Earth on a special video viewer and helps his future parents, the Kents, from being swindled by a crooked banker. It's a long story. It's a very long story. So he eventually gets home, spoiler alert, by getting accidentally trapped on a spaceship on the movie set that takes him off planet to a star system with a yellow sun. And then in subsequent stories, she is actually mentioned again, and he thinks fondly of Lila, perhaps his one true love, not counting Lois and all the other ladies that he loves. Krypton is home to many fascinating animals as well. And honestly, since I gave this last time, I took out a huge chunk about beasts, Kryptonian beasts, because it was way too long. But I love so many things about Krypton. Dogs. Krypton has dogs. Krypto is Kal-El's, Kal-El is Superman, Kal-El's dog on Krypton before Jor-El used Krypto as a test subject for the rocket. Eventually, Krypto found his way to Earth, became Superboy, and later Superman's superpowered pooch. And he's one of my favorite characters in the Superman universe because he's a cool dog, and everybody deserves a cool dog once in their life. And Krypto is a good guy. Krypton had monkeys too. This is Beppo, the super monkey, meeting Super Baby. Again, comics were for kids, but that is Super Baby. Beppo was a nuisance, so Superboy flew him out into space and abandoned him there. He found his way back. It was all good. He came back. Because later, Beppo and Krypto then created the Legion of Super Pets with Comet the Super Horse and Streaky the Super Cat. So, so Beppo's fine. He's fine. Comics were for kids, man. And again, I trimmed so much from this. I didn't even tell you about Dev M and the Rondors and about how it made him immortal. Anyway, you got to look it up. So we're coming now to my favorite thing ever in a Superman story, the Kryptonian Thought Beast. Any fans? Any fans of the Kryptonian Thought Beast? No? Okay. I'm going to show you in a second, but I'm going to describe it first. The Kryptonian Thought Beast is a huge like hippo or rhino-like animal meshed with a lizard, and it lives in the Scarlet Jungle on Krypton. And they call it a thought beast because it lets you know what it's thinking, and it does it with a huge view screen on its head. So this is the beast. This is the Kryptonian Thought Beast, and it's thinking, "Hey, I'm going to eat Superboy," and Superboy's like, "Well, I don't want that to happen." So, yeah, Charles Darwin would have a field day with this. It would blow his mind. I don't know how something evolves to do that. But Supergirl encountered a thought beast as well. And it's the same thought beast that her parents ran into once because the thought beast is thinking about Supergirl's parents while he's about to eat her. Because comic books. Anyway, this is the greatest Kryptonian thing ever, and I love it so much, and I could talk about it for days. Krypton has a rich, wonderful history, and if you enjoyed hearing about it, seek out more from this era, the Silver Age era, 50s to the 80s. It's excellent stuff. Batman, Jimmy Olsen, Lex Luthor, Lois Lane, and practically every other DC hero have all visited Krypton. Lois even tried to hook up with Superman's dad, which I don't know if she thought that the whole way through. Got to think about that, Lois. Now, comic fans all have their own favorite style of story, and mine is obviously these fun, silly ones. And if you dig through enough Superman stories, you're going to find one that you will like. I've thrown a few of these are just a few. A lot of the things I reference are in these collections, which you can find. I know Zod is at the library. I know Phantom Zone is at the library, but check the library. They have 1 billion Superman comics. And again, like I mentioned at the beginning, they've actually gotten a lot better. In about 2011, DC Comics wiped out everything, and started over completely again. And that's why I was mad when I wrote this the first time. But it's better now. So I just want to say thanks again for listening and for giving me your time. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to hand the microphone to somebody else so they can answer them. Yes. Oh, Red Sun, yeah.
Yes, and it was based on the premise that instead of landing in Iowa, Superman landed in Ukraine during the Soviet era.
Yes. Basically, communist Superman. Yes, it's a book called Red Sun. I think it's a little more than 10 years ago, though, but the collection is available. I did see the collection's available at the library. But there is a series, DC Comics has a series of books called Elseworlds that are things that take place on other, in parallel universes, basically. A lot of what-if type stories. And so there is what if Batman had a Green Lantern ring? What if Superman landed during the Civil War? You know, there's a lot of stuff like that. But Red Sun is an excellent, excellent story. And it's very, very good. Highly recommended. It's not as good as this stuff, but it's still pretty good. Okay, I covered all the topics. You know what? We got all sorts of time. I have more. Hang on. Just kidding. No, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. That was great. All right. Everything and more you may have wanted to know about Krypton. I'm going to give a plug for the Lego DC comic short movies. They're like 45 minutes, just enough when you got your homework done, but you still have to go to bed when your mom says. Not enough time for a whole movie, but longer than a show. And that's where I learned about like Brainiac and Martian Manhunter and some of those guys. Those were not part of my media diet as a Laura Ingalls Wilder and American Girl doll child. But it's never too late to learn, and they're extremely silly. So thank you very, very much to our speakers. I'm going to shout them out in reverse order. Again, a little round of applause here for Scott Vertical. Woo! For Surabhi Balachandar. And for John Heider. Guys, thanks so much for doing this. You guys were a blast. You did an excellent job. It's not easy coming up here and talking in front of people. It's a lovely crowd. You are all wonderful and kind. But what if you're not? You know, it makes you scared. So if you have the guts and perhaps a brilliant story in your mind that you might ever want to give as a Nerd Nite talk, please check out annarbor.nerdnite.com and submit a topic. I will get that email and I'll be in touch, and, you know, we'll start talking and see if maybe you'll be the next one on our stage. It'd be great to see you here. And I'll see you all hopefully next time. It's in 1 month. We are switching to Thursdays, folks. So it's going to be Thursday, October 12th, second Thursdays. Hear it live. We have a great lineup, and I'm excited to see you. Tell your friends. Until next time. Bye.